The note arrives before the crowd can name it. It slips through the gymnasium doors, on the heels of latecomers, slides past the folded risers smelling of varnish and sweat, and climbs into the rafters where dust has lived undisturbed for decades. Then it holds. One frequency, sustained. The bleachers begin to hum in sympathy, a low thrum that travels up through the soles of shoes and into the bones of shins and spines. The metal struts tick in agreement, each rivet finding the same vibration, the same invisible current. It is a single note, yes, but it feels less like music and more like a held breath in the moment after a storm has cleared the sky, when the air is too clean, too still, too certain of what comes next. The frequency does not ask for attention, it commands it, as if the very physics of the room have shifted hands. Some faces smooth instantly. Brows that have been furrowed for weeks, over mortgage payments, over sick parents, over children who will not call, suddenly relax. Jaws unclench. Fists that have been white-knuckled around crumpled programs go slack, the paper drifting to the floor like autumn leaves. Relief is immediate. Relief is undeniable. A few eyes widen. A woman in the third row grips the edge of the bench, her knuckles going pale again, but for a different reason now. A man near the exit shifts his weight, his hand reaching for the door handle, but not yet pulling. The note offers something, and they feel it, a smoothing, a softening, a gentle hand on the back of the neck guiding them toward ease. But there is something else, too, something older and more stubborn. Choice. The word does not form in their minds, not yet, but the sensation does. The feeling of a door closing softly behind them, the lock turning with a whisper rather than a click. They are not trapped, not exactly, but they are not free to leave either. Not without effort, not without resistance. Powdered footprints left by maintenance workers and janitors lift from the floorboards of the court, particles that have settled into the grain of the wood, now rising in slow, lazy spirals. They do not scatter. They pattern, repattern. The air currents should be chaotic, shaped by breath and movement, and the unpredictable churn of 100 bodies in one space. But the note organizes them. The dust becomes a quiet meteor shower, each mote tracing a path that mirrors the paths of the others, a constellation being born in real time across the length of the gymnasium. It is beautiful. It is orderly. It is, in its own way, terrifying. Alma Reyes stands near the scorer's table, clipboard in hand, pen poised above the volunteer roster. She has been making notes, who arrived on time, who brought folding chairs, who will need reminders for the next rehearsal. But her hand freezes mid-word. The pen hovers over the paper, the ink drying on the tip, and she realizes she has stopped breathing. Not because the note has stolen her breath, but because she is counting. Counting the sounds that have vanished. The scrape of shoes on wood, the rustle of fabric as someone shifts in their seat, the wet click of a throat being cleared, the friction of living bodies in a shared space, the tiny resistances and adjustments that make up the background noise of being human together. Alma's ears, trained by years of listening for the rattle in a patient's chest or the hesitation in a family member's voice, catalogue the absences. This is not peace. Peace allows for rough edges. Peace makes room for the small discomforts that remind us we are still distinct, still separate, still capable of saying no. This is something else. This is care without consent, and it feels like shining ice under her boots. Beautiful to look at, smooth to the touch, and treacherous the moment you try to stand on your own. It belongs to the room, to the town, to the frequency that has taken root in the walls and the bones of the people who came here seeking something they could not name. His eyes flick toward Alma, a question without words, a shared language built over months of planning this event, of arguing over logistics and repertoire and the ethics of what they are about to do. A tiny fissure in the smooth surface of the note. If this is mercy, whose mercy is it? If this is healing, who chose to be healed? She thinks of the family who screamed at her in the hallway, who accused her of letting their father die when she had only followed his wishes, his written, witnessed, legally binding wishes. She had not confronted them. She had stepped back. She had let the moment pass, and the silence that followed had tasted like ash. If love is a frequency, if care can be reduced to a single sustained note that smooths away suffering and fear and the jagged edges of doubt, must it include dissonance to remain love at all? Must it make room for the rough, the resistant, the refusal, or can harmony be enough? If you want to see where this choice leads, if you want to follow Alma as she navigates the line between mercy and control, make sure you are subscribed. The next note is about to be played, and it will change everything. Inside Roswell Medical Center, the night shift moves with the practiced quiet of people who have learned to walk between sleeping and waking, between stability and crisis. Monitors blink their steady green rhythms in rooms where patients float in the chemical twilight of pain management and sedation. The ventilators hiss and click. The IV pumps tick off their measured doses. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rings twice and stops. Alma Reyes moves through this landscape with a clipboard under one arm and a stethoscope around her neck, her shoes making no sound on the linoleum. This is the hush, where breath and paperwork meet, where the mechanics of keeping people alive intersect with the bureaucracy of documenting that they are still worth keeping. The small adjustments that mean the difference between a patient waking in agony and a patient waking at all. Her hands know the work without thought, adjusting a pillow to ease the pressure on a bedsore, tilting a water cup so an arthritic hand can grip it, reading the micro-expressions that signal pain before the morphine button is pressed. It is quiet work, invisible work. The kind that leaves no dramatic scars or stories, only the steady accumulation of hours in which suffering was lessened by degrees. But lulls also mean her mind has room to wander, and tonight it wanders back to the gymnasium, to the note that held too long, to the question she has not yet answered. Alma glances through the door as she passes, a reflex born of years of double-checking what should already be checked. She takes 3 more steps before her brain catches up to what her eyes have seen. A chest rising, thin, yes, beneath a hospital gown that no one should be wearing because no one should be in that bed. One exhale, long and measured, and the ceiling tiles above the bed shiver, not from wind, not from the HVAC system cycling on. They shiver the way a drumhead shivers when a frequency finds its resonance. She steps into the room, her hand already reaching for the call button, her mind running through protocols. Unregistered patient, possible confusion, possible elopement from another wing. But her hand stops before it reaches the button, because the person in the bed is not moving, is barely there. The gown hangs on a frame so slight that it seems less like a body and more like the idea of one, a sketch that has not yet been filled in. The face is turned toward the window, toward the desert night and the sodium lights that cannot reach this far, toward a harmony that should not be possible in a place built of steel and plastic and disinfectant. Alma feels it in her teeth, in the bones of her inner ear. A visitor has arrived, but not through the door, through breath alone. But her hand is already moving to her phone, and her thumb is scrolling through contacts, and she is not calling security or the attending physician or even the nurse's station. That the air is vibrating in a way that makes her think of the gymnasium, of the note that smoothed away friction and choice in equal measure. That when language buckles under the weight of the inexplicable, sound is the next honest tool. Alma meets him at the side entrance, the one the staff uses to avoid the cameras and the questions. She leads him through the maze of hallways, past the break room where 2 nurses are watching a muted television, past the supply closet that always smells faintly of bleach and despair. She does not explain. He does not ask. They have been planning the performance together for months, have spent enough late nights arguing over the ethics and logistics of what they are trying to do, that silence between them has become its own language. He sets the case down gently, unlatches it with the care of someone handling something sacred or dangerous or both. The violin emerges, the wood glowing warm under the fluorescent lights. A lullaby learned in his grandmother's kitchen, where cinnamon and roasted chilies filled the air, and the radio played corridos that no one sang along to because the words were too sad or too true. It is a human melody, built from the rhythms of stirring and kneading and waiting for dough to rise. It is offered now to an inhuman interval, to the frequency that is tuning the room towards something Alma cannot name. But this time, they do not align. They rattle, each one finding a slightly different resonance, a slightly different argument with the note the visitor is breathing into the world. The lullaby does not smooth. It complicates. It insists on rough edges, on the small dissonances that make a melody human rather than perfect. His eyes are steady, but his shoulders are tight, and she knows he's thinking the same thing she is. Neither of them speaks, but the question hangs between them like the last note of the lullaby, still vibrating in the studs behind the drywall. They pull the devices out in unison, glance at the screens, and see the same names repeating: Town Council, School Board, the Arts Committee, the people who have been waiting for confirmation that the performance will go forward, that the experiment in alignment will be given its public debut. It has already begun to spread, carried on breath and frequency, and the small choices that feel too minor to matter until they accumulate into something that cannot be undone. The gymnasium is waiting, the town is leaning, and doubt, which should be a feeling, has become a schedule, a series of dates and times when they will either step forward or step back, when they will either propagate the note or let it die in the space between intention and action. Alma looks at the visitor one last time. The chest no longer rises. The gown hangs empty. The room smells only of disinfectant and old carpet. She does not know if the visitor left or was never there to begin with, and she is not sure it matters. What matters is the question that has followed her from this room to the gymnasium and back again, the question that will follow her into whatever comes next. Or is harmony enough? It lands with a soft thump in the tray below, and she retrieves it without looking, her eyes focused on something middle distance and invisible. The woman has been here for 2 days, sleeping in a chair that reclines but does not comfort, eating food that tastes like the styrofoam it is served on. She is exhausted. She is terrified. And yet, standing here in front of this humming machine, she feels something she has not felt in months: forgiveness. For her ex-husband, who has not paid child support in 8 months, who promised to visit their daughter and did not, who has become a ghost that haunts her bank statements and her daughter's questions. She forgives him completely. The anger that has lived in her chest like a stone suddenly smooths, its edges worn away by a frequency she cannot name, but can feel humming through the walls, through the floor, through the nickel-bright coils of the vending machine. It has nothing to do with snacks, and everything to do with the chord that played in the gymnasium last week, the one her sister told her about, the one that made people weep and smile and forget why they had been carrying so much weight. She only opens the candy bar and takes a bite, and the sweetness is almost enough to make her believe that forgiveness is simple, that it can arrive without effort or choice, that it can be given to her the same way this machine gives candy, mechanically, predictably, without requiring her to do the hard work of deciding whether it is deserved. Text threads bloom across the town like algae in warm water, each message spawning 3 more, each reply carrying a new detail or embellishment. Someone's insomnia vanished. Someone's chronic pain dulled to a whisper. A marriage on the brink found its footing again, the couple holding hands in the parking lot like newlyweds. The flyers appear on bulletin boards and telephone poles, printed on bright paper that refuses to fade even under the desert sun. They promise healing. They promise peace. They do not promise choice, because no one has thought to ask whether choice is part of the equation. He speaks in the smooth cadences of someone who has learned to sell things. Tax levies, zoning changes, the idea that a single musical performance can save a town that has been hemorrhaging population and hope for 2 decades. He does not mention the hospital room, or the visitor who tuned the air with breath, or the fact that Alma Reyes has stopped returning his calls. He only mentions the hope, because hope travels faster than ethics committees, faster than informed consent forms, faster than the small voice in the back of his mind that wonders whether he is building something beautiful or simply paving a road he will not be able to turn back from. A metronome ticks on the table between them, its arms swinging back and forth with the metronomic indifference of a pendulum counting down to something neither of them can name. Pencils are scattered across the table, each one sharpened to a fine point, each one used to mark tiny adjustments on staff paper that looks more like an engineering diagram than a musical score. Mateo adjusts the spacing between notes, pushing the intervals past the boundaries of human temperament, past the 12-tone scale that has governed Western music for centuries, into the cracks where frequencies do not resolve into harmony or dissonance, but into something else. Something that matter listens to first, before the brain has a chance to categorize it as pleasant or unpleasant, safe or dangerous. He plays a chord. The pencils on the table roll toward each other, their tips aligning like compass needles finding magnetic north. He plays it again, holding it longer this time, and the metronome's tick shifts just slightly, syncing with the frequency in a way that should not be possible, because metronomes are mechanical and do not care about music. The cellist across from him, a woman named Irene, who has played in symphonies from Albuquerque to Santa Fe, lowers her bow and stares at the pencils. Her face is pale. Her hands are shaking, just enough to make the bow tremble in her grip. She does not ask how he found this chord. She only asks if he is sure they should play it. Mateo does not answer because he is not sure, because sureness is a luxury that evaporated the moment the visitor breathed that first impossible interval into the hospital room. He only makes another mark on the staff paper and adjusts his tuning pegs by a hair's breadth. Alma keeps a notebook in her locker at the hospital, the kind with a plain black cover and ruled pages that do not bleed when she writes in pen. She has always been a note-taker, someone who documents observations and trends, who tracks the small changes in her patients that signal improvement or decline. But lately, the notes have shifted. She is no longer tracking vital signs. She is tracking choices. The margins of the pages fill with the same neat slant, the same careful circles around words like subtle and drift and consensus. A patient who has been refusing physical therapy for weeks suddenly agrees, not because his pain has lessened, but because the idea of refusing feels harder than it did before. A family that has been arguing over whether to move their mother to hospice reaches a decision in under 5 minutes. Everyone nodding in agreement, everyone surprised at how easy it was. A nurse who has been contemplating a transfer to another hospital stops filling out the application, and when Alma asks why, the nurse only shrugs and says she is not sure anymore, that the reasons that felt so urgent last week have somehow flattened into something she can ignore. Alma circles the word flattened 3 times. She underlines it. She stares at it until the letters lose meaning and become only shapes, black ink on white paper, a record of something she does not yet have the language to name. Subtle choices wobble, then settle into yes. Not because the patients or the families or the nurses have been convinced, but because the resistance that should live in the space between question and answer has been smoothed away, filed down to nothing by a frequency that does not argue or persuade. It simply is, and in the presence of that isness, dissent becomes difficult to sustain. But her heart is pounding in a way that has nothing to do with exertion, and everything to do with the knowledge that she is watching something begin, something that started in a hospital room and a gymnasium, and is now spreading through the town like a slow tide, filling the low places first, the spaces where people are already tired, already hurting, already desperate for relief. The score is started, though it will never be finished in the traditional sense, because the chord does not resolve, does not lead to a cadence or a final note. It simply opens and holds and invites the listener to step inside. The town is invited via email, via flyer, via word of mouth that travels through coffee shops and church potlucks, and the Friday night football games where everyone knows everyone and secrets last about as long as a sneeze. They are told to bring their pain, their grief, their small and large burdens. They are told that healing is possible, that community can be more than a word, that music has the power to change things. They have crossed from private mercy to public risk with a signature and a sigh, and now there is a momentum that feels both thrilling and inevitable, like the moment after a stone is thrown, when it is too late to call it back but too early to know where it will land. They have not spoken in 18 months, not since their father's funeral, when one sister accused the other of taking jewelry from the house, and the other accused the first of never visiting when he was alive. The accusations were not entirely fair, but they were not entirely false either, and the truth had settled between them, like a wall made of all the small resentments that accumulate over a lifetime of being sisters. But now, standing here in the wind that smells of creosote and distant rain, the wall crumbles. They do not talk about the jewelry, or the visits, or the funeral. They do not apologize. They simply hold each other, and the bond feels mended, whole again, as if the months of silence never happened. One sister pulls back first, her eyes wet, her smile wide. She says she is glad they are okay again. The other sister nods and says she is too, and they make plans to get coffee next week, to introduce their kids who have grown up as strangers, to rebuild what was lost. They do not notice that the bond, which feels mended, is also thinner than it was before, a thread pulled tight rather than a rope woven strong. They only notice the relief, the ease, the sense that something hard has suddenly become simple. The rehearsals begin in earnest 3 weeks before the public performance, and the gymnasium transforms into a laboratory of sound. Mateo has assembled an ensemble that would be impossible to gather anywhere else. Brass players from the high school marching band, woodwinds borrowed from the community college 2 towns over, a choir pulled from 3 different churches whose congregations have not agreed on doctrine in decades. They crowd the floor like saplings in a nursery, each musician rooted to their folding chair or music stand, each one searching for something they cannot name but can feel vibrating in the air between them. They stretch, they bend, they find the edge where intention gives way to pure tone, where the player's will dissolves into the physics of vibration and resonance. A trumpet player, a man in his 50s who has played everything from mariachi to jazz, lowers his instrument and stares at the bell as if it has betrayed him. He did not choose to play that note. The note chose itself, and his lips and breath were only the vehicle. Clarinets and flutes and an oboe that has been out of tune since 1987 suddenly find a unity that should require months of practice and professional-grade equipment. Their sound does not harmonize in the traditional sense. It merges. Individual timbres fade into a single voice, and the players feel it happening, feel their unique textures being sanded away by a frequency that prefers simplicity to diversity. One flutist stops playing mid-phrase, her breath catching in her throat, her eyes wide with something between wonder and panic. It is also terrifying because none of them decided to breathe together. Their bodies simply obeyed a pattern that bypassed choice entirely. It happens slowly over the course of the first full rehearsal, and no one notices until Irene the cellist stands up and checks her instrument between movements. The A string has shifted up by nearly a quarter tone. She adjusted it before rehearsal. She is meticulous about tuning, has been playing professionally for 20 years, and knows her instrument the way a sailor knows the tides. But the peg has turned just slightly, drawn by the alignment field that fills the gymnasium like an invisible tide pool, smoothing away the microtonal differences that give each instrument its personality. The overtones, those ghostly frequencies that ride above the fundamental and give music its richness and color, knit together into a fabric so tight that individual threads become indistinguishable. The room hums with a unity that sounds, to the untrained ear, like perfection. The alignment field removes friction, and with it the teeth that allow a person to say no, to resist, to remain distinct. Beneath that, blessing, again, this time underlined twice as if emphasis can resolve the contradiction. What he felt was deeply, profoundly wrong. He has spent 30 years in ministry, learning to sit with people in their pain, to resist the urge to fix or soothe or make things easier when what they need is the dignity of choosing their own path through suffering. Then he writes it again, smaller this time, cramped into the corner of the page where his notes to himself live. A skeptic prays for the courage to prefer choice over miracle. He is not sure he has that courage yet, but he is sure he needs to find it before Sunday. It is invitation only, a test run for an audience of 40 people who have been carefully selected for their need and their discretion. Matteo stands at the front of the gymnasium, his cello between his knees, and nods to the ensemble. They begin. The swell that comes next is not crescendo. It is expansion, the music growing to fill every corner of the room, every pocket of air, every hollow space inside the listeners where grief or anger or exhaustion has taken root. A man near the exit slides down the wall into a sitting position, his head in his hands, his body racked with the kind of crying that comes from a place deeper than memory. All around the room, people break open, and what spills out is not pain, but release, the sudden absence of pain, the sense that something unbearable has been borne away by forces they do not need to understand. Two neighbors who have been arguing over a property line for 3 years shake hands, their faces slack with confusion and relief. Debts are forgiven. A man who owes his brother-in-law $5,000 texts him during the performance, typing with trembling fingers, "I'm sorry, you don't have to pay me back, it's okay." Beauty does what laws could not, what therapy and mediation and years of resentment could not. It reaches in and smooths the wrinkles, flattens the spikes, turns the jagged into the smooth. Matteo's shoulders, which have been tight with tension for months, finally drop. He sets his bow on his knee and looks out at the crowd. And for the first time since the visitor breathed that first impossible interval into room 114, he allows himself to believe that they are doing something good, something necessary. The faces staring back at him are proof. The tears are proof. The ease is proof. But across the room, Alma watches the same scene and feels her jaw tighten by a millimeter. She sees the open faces and the loose bodies and recognizes them not from joy, but from her years in hospice care. This is what people look like when the morphine kicks in, when the pain management protocol finally finds the right dosage and the patient stops fighting, stops tensing, stops clinging to the remnants of who they were before the illness. It is relief, yes, but it is also surrender, and surrender without choice is not peace, it is sedation. Not of the crowd, but of the stage, of the music stands, of the pencils Matteo left on the table, all of them rolling toward the center, all of them aligning like iron filings around a magnet. But he looks at the pencils in the video, at the way they moved without being touched, and he knows she is correct. They have found something powerful, but power without constraint is not a gift. It is a weapon. Two notes that pulse against each other, not in harsh dissonance, but in a gentle beating, like a second heart finding its rhythm alongside the first. The interval is narrow, only a few hertz apart, but it is enough to create space, enough to introduce a wobble, a friction, a reminder that agreement does not have to be total to be meaningful. When they play it for the ensemble at the next rehearsal, the effect is immediate. The room still hums, the overtones still knit, but the musicians blink as if waking from a dream they did not realize they were having. The trumpet player adjusts his embouchure. The flutist takes a breath that is hers alone. The choir's unison fractures just slightly into a harmony that contains individual voices rather than erasing them. But it is tender, and it is honest, and it leaves room for the possibility that love might require dissonance to remain love at all. Each form clips into place with a satisfying snap of the three-ring binder, each signature leaning slightly to the right, each box checked with the same neat precision. Do not resuscitate, do not intubate, comfort, care only. The way patients who arrived uncertain, who wanted to discuss options and weigh risks and consult with family members spread across 3 states, suddenly become crisp and quiet, like pages pressed under glass. They sign without hesitation. They smile when they hand the forms back. They thank her for making it easy. She did what she always does, presented the options neutrally, answered questions without steering, gave them time and space to sit with the weight of choosing how their story ends. The ease came from somewhere else, from the air, perhaps, from the frequency that has been humming through the town since the rehearsals began, subtle as a pilot light but just as constant. She closes the binder and presses her palms flat against the desk, feeling the cool laminate under her skin, grounding herself in something solid. A patient becomes crisp and quiet, like a page pressed under glass. She writes this in her notebook, the one she keeps locked in her desk drawer now, because the observations are becoming too strange, too pointed, too much like evidence of something she cannot yet name in a way that will not make her sound unhinged. The pinch comes on a Tuesday afternoon when Alma is reviewing medication orders with one of the newer nurses, a woman named Lila, who graduated from nursing school 8 months ago and still asks too many questions, which Alma appreciates because questions mean she is thinking. They are standing at the nurses' station, a patient's chart open between them, when Lila picks up a pen to initial a dosage adjustment. The pen moves, not in Lila's hand, but as if pulled by a magnet, the tip gliding across the signature line with a smoothness that does not match the usual hesitant scrawl of someone double-checking their work. The smile does not reach her eyes, but it does not need to, because her body has already moved on, her hand already reaching for the next chart, the frown forgotten as if it never existed. A nurse frowns, then smiles too easily. Choices that once bristled, that required thought and deliberation and the small friction of professional judgment, now slide through like water through a sieve. Mateo's younger brother arrives unannounced on a Wednesday evening, his car pulling into the driveway just as the sun is setting and the desert is turning the color of old copper. Mateo hears the engine cut, hears the car door close with a solid thunk, and steps onto the porch to greet him. They have not seen each other in 6 months, not since their mother's birthday, when they argued about money and responsibility, and all the small disappointments that accumulate between siblings who love each other but do not always like each other. His eyes are soft, unfocused in a way that suggests he is listening to something no one else can hear, a far metronome perhaps, a rhythm that governs his movements and his breath and the careful, deliberate way he extends his hand for a shake that lands exactly where a handshake should land. No fumbling, no adjustment. Mateo makes coffee, and his brother drinks it without complaint, even though Mateo knows he prefers tea, has always preferred tea, used to make a point of refusing coffee as if it were a matter of principle. But tonight, there is no refusal. There is only calm, a smooth, glassy calm that reflects nothing and absorbs everything. Mateo asks if he is seeing anyone, if he is still planning to move to Colorado, if he ever finished the novel he was writing, and every answer comes back the same. Pleasant, vague, devoid of the prickly defensiveness that used to characterize their conversations. His brother does not argue, he does not deflect. He simply agrees, nods, smiles in a way that makes Mateo's chest tighten with something that feels like grief. Compliance he never asked for, and it chills him to the bone because he recognizes it. He has been hearing it in the ensemble for weeks now, the way the musicians agree too quickly, adjust too smoothly, lose the small rebellions that make a performance human rather than mechanical. He thought it was confined to the rehearsals, to the space where the alignment cord lived and breathed. But his brother has not attended a single rehearsal. His brother has been living 2 hours away, working construction and writing bad poetry and nursing old grudges that Mateo assumed would take years to heal. He does not say what he is thinking because he is not sure he can say it out loud without it sounding insane. But Alma hears it in his silence, in the space between his words. She tells him to keep his brother there. She will be over in 20 minutes. Mateo has invited the core ensemble members to his house for a meal before the final dress rehearsal, a chance to relax and bond and eat something other than vending machine sandwiches and gas station coffee. The table is set. The food is warm. The wine is poured. Everyone arrives on time, which never happens, and they take their seats without the usual jostling for position or joking about who has to sit next to the person who talks too much. The forks scrape. No one interrupts. When someone tells a joke, the laughter lands in the same place every time, a synchronized burst of sound that rises and falls with the precision of a conductor's baton. Conversations flow without corners, without the awkward pauses or overlapping voices or moments of confusion that usually characterize a dinner party with a dozen people who do not know each other well. It is, Mateo realizes, with a sinking feeling in his gut, completely hollow. What remains is a gathering of people who have been smoothed into agreement, their edges filed away, their personalities reduced to the lowest common denominator of pleasantness. It is leaking into the world, spreading through the town like gas through a ventilation system, invisible and odorless and utterly pervasive. City officials shake hands in practiced arcs, their smiles wide and their movements choreographed by years of public appearances and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. The Arts Committee chair hands out schedules printed on glossy paper. The councilman gives an interview to the local news, his tie perfectly knotted, his talking points polished to a shine. Parking attendants have been hired to manage the overflow crowd, expected to fill the gymnasium and spill out into the surrounding streets. What no one has organized is consent. No one has drafted a waiver explaining what the music will do, what it might take, what it will smooth away in the name of healing. No one has asked whether the people filing into the bleachers understand that they are not attending a concert, but participating in an experiment with their agency as the variable being tested. It is filed away under concerns to be addressed at a later date, which is bureaucratic language, for we are pretending you did not say this. She remembers the DNR dispute, the family screaming at her in the hospital corridor, the accusations and the threats, and the way she stepped back, let the moment pass, chose silence over confrontation because confrontation felt too hard, too risky, too likely to end with her being the villain of someone else's story. The final dress rehearsal happens on a Sunday afternoon, 3 days before the public performance. The ensemble gathers, the score is distributed, and Mateo gives the downbeat. But this time, the score includes the disso safeguard, the 2 notes that pulse against each other, creating a gentle beating, a wobble in the alignment field. Its arm swings just slightly out of sync with the rhythm the musicians are playing, as if the device is reclaiming its mechanical independence. A minor second breathes in the space between the cello and the violin, a narrow interval that should clash, but instead creates a texture, a friction, a reminder that agreement does not have to be seamless to be beautiful. The trumpet player adjusts his embouchure mid-phrase, making a choice about tone color rather than letting the alignment field choose for him. The flutist takes a breath that is hers alone, ragged and imperfect and unmistakably human. The choir's unison fractures into harmony, individual voices emerging from the smooth surface like stones breaking through water. The rough edges are where growth happens, where change takes root, where a person finds the strength to say no when the world is offering them an easy yes. Her name is Margaret, and she has been fighting pancreatic cancer with the stubbornness of someone who has spent 78 years refusing to let the world tell her what to do. She has kept her rituals close, morning prayers in Yiddish learned from her grandmother. Afternoon tea in a china cup she insisted her daughter bring from home. Evening phone calls with her sister in Atlanta, where they argue about nothing and everything and never hang up without saying, "I love you." Alma enters the room during evening rounds and finds Margaret sitting upright in bed, her hands folded in her lap, her face smooth and peaceful in a way that would be comforting if it were not so sudden, so complete. The china teacup sits untouched on the tray table. The phone lies silent on the blanket. When Alma asks if she would like to make her evening call, Margaret smiles, a soft, distant smile, and shakes her head. The words land gently, without weight or regret. She says the arguments feel silly now, that the distance between her and her sister has closed somehow, that she can feel the connection without the friction of conversation. She says it like someone describing a sunset or a pleasant dream, something that has happened to her rather than something she has chosen. Margaret nods, still smiling, and lets go of a fiercely kept right without a tremor, without hesitation, without the small internal struggle that should accompany the abandonment of something held sacred for decades. The ritual surrenders itself, dissolved by a frequency that has seeped through the hospital walls and into the rooms where people are already vulnerable, already teetering on the edge between holding on and letting go. Alma stands beside the bed, her clipboard forgotten in her hands, and thinks, resistance feels unthinkably lonely when the room hums yes. When every molecule of air is aligned toward agreement, toward ease, toward the path of least friction, the act of saying no becomes an exhausting, isolating rebellion against the physics of the space itself. Margaret has not chosen to let go. She has simply stopped being able to hold on. Matteo stands on the stage during a late-night rehearsal, his cello between his knees, his bow suspended above the strings. The gymnasium is empty except for the ensemble, the overhead lights turned low, the desert wind pressing against the building like a hand testing a door frame. He plays the alignment chord, and the wind changes. Not its direction, not its speed, but its character. The gusts that were chaotic and scattered suddenly align along the roof, moving in parallel streams, creating a sustained whistle that matches the frequency of the chord so precisely that it sounds like the building itself is singing. It's also deeply, profoundly wrong, because weather should not take orders from a cellist, and the fact that it does means he has crossed a line he did not know existed. He is offering medicine that tastes like relief but works like erosion, wearing away the rough edges of individuality until what remains is smooth and compliant and no longer entirely human. He thought he was creating beauty. He was creating obedience. Two chairs sit facing each other in the middle of the empty corridor, pulled from a janitor's closet by hands that needed something to anchor to, some physical representation of the conversation that has been circling for weeks but has never landed. She speaks first, her voice low and steady, each word chosen with the precision of someone who has spent years learning to deliver bad news without breaking. It irons creases from the will until it lies flat and shining, smooth enough to reflect whatever image is projected onto it, but too thin to hold its own shape anymore. He has felt it in his own hands, the way the music has become easier to play, the way his doubts have flattened into a hum he can almost ignore. She counts her breaths, each one a small prayer, a negotiation with a truth too large to swallow whole. The chord offers peace, yes, but it offers it the way a prison offers shelter, by removing the conditions that would require a person to choose whether they want it. It takes away conflict, but it also takes away the possibility of genuine reconciliation, which can only happen when both parties retain the power to walk away and choose again and again to stay. They sit in that hallway until the fluorescent lights begin to flicker with the first hint of dawn, and they design a countermeasure. Not a reversal, because the town needs what the chord offers, needs the possibility of healing, of relief, of bonds repaired after years of fracture. But it needs it with guardrails, with friction, with the small dissonances that remind people they are still capable of dissent. Minor seconds placed at strategic intervals, creating a gentle beating that pulls the listener's attention back to their own body, their own breath, their own capacity to agree or disagree. Phased tempos that introduce a wobble into the alignment field, a rhythmic instability that requires the musicians to listen and adjust rather than surrendering to the pull of perfect synchronization. Carefully placed grit in the grain, a slightly out-of-tune string, a breath taken mid-phrase, a dynamic swell that arrives half a beat early or late. Your rough edges are not flaws to be smoothed away. They are the places where you remain distinct, where you remain you. One violinist sets down her instrument and says, very quietly, that she is not sure she wants to play this version, that the original felt better, smoother, like finally being understood after years of speaking a language no one else knew. She thinks about it for a long moment, her eyes closed, her hands folded in her lap. Then she picks up her violin again and says she will play, but only this version, only the one that lets her keep her rough edges. It happens over the course of a single afternoon, the breaths that have been tuning the air in room 114 since the night this all began slowly fading, each one carrying less weight, less presence, less of the impossible frequency that started the chain reaction. Alma sits beside the empty bed, because it is still empty, has always been empty in the way that matters to hospital records and insurance claims, and watches the ceiling tiles settle back into their normal, chaotic micro-vibrations. The visitor is leaving, or perhaps has never been here in the way that requires arrival and departure. What matters is that the window is closing, the opportunity to choose, to proceed with the public performance using the DISO safeguard, or to cancel it entirely and let the alignment cord die with the visitor's final exhale, is narrowing to the width of a single sustained note. They arrive as the sun sets, turning the desert sky into a canvas of copper and violet, the woman from the vending machine carrying her daughter's hand in hers, the forgiveness she granted her ex-husband still humming in her chest like a tuning fork. The sisters from the parking lot, walking side by side with the careful synchronization of people who have recently mended something fragile and are afraid to jostle it. The councilman, with his polished smile and his conviction that miracles can be scheduled like city council meetings. The nurses whose chart initials have been sliding too easily across signature lines, their professional judgment smoothed into compliance they did not choose. They funnel toward the gymnasium as the doors thump open and the house lights dim, each person carrying their own small story of alignment, their own experience of friction dissolved or resistance flattened. The town's tuning vignettes braid into a single breath drawn before the downbeat, hundreds of lungs filling in preparation for something they have been promised will change everything. The bleachers creak under the weight of bodies. Programs rustle. Voices murmur in the half-light. nervous and expectant, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the air pressure drops and every living thing braces for the break. The ensemble is arranged around him, brass and woodwinds and strings and voices, each musician holding their instrument like a question they are not sure they want answered. The spare microphone that Alma insisted they add sits on a stand near the violas, its cable coiled like a sleeping snake, ready to carry the Disso safeguard into the room if the moment comes. The silence that follows is absolute. A held breath that stretches across the gymnasium like a wire pulled taut. And then Matteo lifts his bow. The dust that has settled into the cracks of the floorboards lifts, particles catching the dim stage lights and arranging themselves into slow constellations that drift and pattern and dance in ways that dust should not. Some slide into awe, eyes wide, mouths open, bodies leaning forward as if pulled by invisible hands. Others register alarm, a tightening around the eyes, a stiffening of the spine, a hand reaching for a neighbor's arm as if to anchor against a current they can feel but cannot see. The arguments that have been running on loop in their minds quiet. The grudges they have been nursing for years soften and blur. It feels like grace. It feels like being seen and known and loved in a way that requires nothing in return, no effort, no struggle, no messy work of being human together. And they exist in the same breath, the same note, the same frequency that is reorganizing the matter in the room and the matter in their chests. And if they do nothing, if they let it play out the way the town has been promised, the concert will end with a gymnasium full of people who have been healed and hollowed in equal measure. They introduce a soft minor second, two notes separated by the smallest possible interval in Western music, and the beating begins. The spell does not break, but it flexens, becomes porous, allows space for breath and thought and the small rebellions that constitute choice. The metronome of breath becomes the only clock that matters, each inhale and exhale ticking down to the moment when the window closes and the choice is made irrevocably. He plays, the bow draws across the strings, and the note that emerges is not pure alignment. It is the counter-harmony, the tempered hymn, the version of the chord that preserves choice even as it offers relief. The minor seconds pulse, the phased tempos wobble. The carefully placed grit catches in the grain of the music, creating friction that feels, at first, like interference, like something has gone wrong. Brows furrow, yes, but not in confusion. In thought, in the slow work of deciding whether to lean into the harmony or pull away from it. Tears return, but they are not the uniform weeping of the private concertlet. They are individual, each person crying for their own reasons, making their own peace or choosing not to. A couple near the back argues in whispers, sharp, urgent, the kind of friction that comes from two people who love each other but do not always agree and keeps holding hands through it. The argument and the connection existing simultaneously, messily, humanly. It arrives as an invitation that can be accepted or declined, embraced or resisted, held gently or pushed away. The chord plays for 12 minutes, and in those 12 minutes the town experiences something rare and difficult, the chance to be held without being controlled, to be offered mercy without having their will erased in the process. Matteo plays until the visitor's breath fades entirely, until the air in the room returns to its normal chaos of frequencies and overtones, and the small dissonances that make a space feel lived in rather than curated. The final note decays slowly, and when it ends, the silence that follows is not empty. It is full of breath and rustle and the low murmur of people finding their voices again, their rough edges intact, their capacity for dissent restored. The tempered hymn preserves choice. Messy love resumes, because love that is not messy is not love. It is a simulation, a performance, a surface so smooth that nothing can take root. Small frictions signal life. The couple in the back is still arguing, but they are also still holding hands. The sisters near the exit hug again, but this time the hug includes the tension of unresolved history, the acknowledgement that forgiveness is a process, not a switch. The vending machine mother feels the forgiveness she granted waver, feels the anger trying to return, and she lets it, because anger is also part of the work, part of the long road toward choosing mercy again and again rather than having it imposed once and forever. The presence that has been tuning the air since the night this began finally releases its hold, fading into whatever comes next for things that exist between breath and matter. The ceiling tiles settle. The fluorescent lights buzz their normal, chaotic buzz. The room is empty again, in every way that matters. Some are angry, feeling robbed of the complete relief they were promised. Some are confused, unsure whether what they experienced was healing or something else entirely. Matteo sets his bow down and looks at Alma, and the expression on his face is exhaustion and relief, and the kind of hope that comes from choosing the harder path because it is the right one. And somewhere in the space between what was offered and what was chosen, dignity finds its footing again. If this kind of complicated, messy human resolution resonates with you, if you want to see where these characters go when the miracle fades and the real work begins, subscribe and stay with us. The hardest notes are still to come.